Here we are. We are at the conclusion of our 5-part series. We began with the Pshat, which was both the surface, but also the historical context and the archaeological evidence to give us a feel for the Megillah, where we pointed out the only religious act in the Megillah itself is Esther fasting and going before the king. And fasting, again, you have to go a little bit beneath the surface. Fasting is understood to be part of prayer, and not just fasting for no reason, but rather it was a point of prayer to God, even though, again, God is not mentioned. So we have this simple understanding, and we spoke about how it's connected to the stories of Joseph, the stories of Daniel, the stories of Ezra, that there's a connection to the previous temples, and there's a connection to the previous temple and looking forward to the future second temple and the Jews leaving exile, how the Megillah is echoing that. And it's also echoing the Joseph story where we see the hand of God. So that was in the first class. In the second class, we spoke about Pshat, Remez, allusion, in different ways, messages and parables using the Megillah to explain the human psyche. And then we had Drush, we had different Midrashim, we only touched the surface. There are many wonderful interpretations and commentaries on the Megillah and the stories of the Megillah. We spoke a bit about anti-Semitism. And then we had the mystical, we spoke about the connection with Yom Kippur a little bit. So what I want to do with the Hasidic understanding is pull them all together, all the strands of the Megillah, to bring together into one tapestry so that we can see the light that shines from within the Megillah in a way that illuminates our life. This is the Hasidic approach. The Hasidism is not just the mystical, but it strives to find the unity and relationship between all the other different parts of the Torah. So I want to start with one. There are a few primary ideas that we find in Hasidic thought and Chabad Hasidic thought about the Megillah. So I want to start with number one is the idea that Jew is in exile. Exile is likened to a sleep. When a person sleeps, there's a paradox. The soul goes on high, the person comes back rejuvenated, but their body is not fully, their soul is not fully vested in their body. When we said the word king in the Megillah can always mean God, whenever it says king alone can mean God, we saw this as a message. When the king could not sleep. So what is this? In that night, there was slumber. Who was sleeping? Well, we say God was sleeping. But why does God sleep? God sleeps because we sleep. Everything that happens in the spiritual realms is a product of our service down here. What we do, God mirrors. We say in our Psalms and prayers Friday night and Saturday morning, God is my protective shade, Hashem Tzilcha. But that can be read as God is my shadow. What does this mean? God created a world where humanity is his partner. What we do causes the divine flow to react. This is a very important element, that our behavior and our deeds. So those who have joined to see Dr. Levchenko, we finished already with his Shiva, so you can email him directly or call him. So now we're doing a Megillah class. I'm sorry if you missed him, but you can email him or call him to give your condolences. So the magic of our life, the miracle of our life, is that we say that God made a reciprocal relationship with us. How we behave causes God to respond to us. Just like the interplay of light and shadow based on how I'm moving my hands, God says, you do, I'll respond. So here's the problem. We read this, in the Torah, it speaks of, if you will act to me with happenstance, I will respond to you and act as if you are in a world of happenstance, of chaos. In other words, how we behave causes a response. So when we are sleeping in exile, when we're less vested in our commitment to our faith and to God, that's called sleeping. Awake means we're fully vested. So Hashem, God, responds. And if we're sleeping in exile, God is responding. And God is, so to speak, sleeping, which means it feels like his presence is not felt. Whenever we're going through a tough time, we say it's like God is hiding his face. And the idea that we say, God, awaken, oh God, is come, get vested in our world. Don't stay what seems to us to be aloof. Become vested. So here's the problem. The problem is that there's a relationship with God that's based on our behavior. When you behave well, God responds with blessings. If, God forbid, we choke off the blessings, if, God forbid, we act in a negative manner, so we choke off. So then punishment is seen not as punishment, but as a consequence that I'm doing to myself. Much as if I put my hand on fire and it got burnt, it wouldn't be a punishment, it's a consequence. So when I go and I turn my face away from God, I'm no longer facing God, that causes God, so to speak, to turn away from me. So the natural state of the spiritual world is cause and effect, is consequence. So here's the thing. The world as it is, God is concealed. The Hebrew word for world is olam, which means concealment. The world is a place where the divinity and the divine and God is hidden. It's not heaven. In heaven, you see, you feel, you know godliness. Here, you have all your tzaras, your issues, your problems, your perspective, and God may be part of it, but the natural world you're looking at conceals the divine. So you have nature, God is concealed. You have a time of exile, when God is even more concealed, when we have turned away, and that causes God, so to speak, to conceal his face. So the great miracle of Purim is that Balaylahu, it was that night in the dark of exile, Nadada Shnas HaMelech, the king's sleep was disturbed. We're referring not just to Achashverosh down here, but God himself. God himself. Of course, as Karen points out in the note, in the chat, nature reveals God, but you have to look. And you don't necessarily, if we walked around God-centric all the time, we would never think the things we think or say the things we say. When we're in heaven, we're not going to say those things. No, with the world itself is God made a world that seems separate. Our job is to find God in the world. God is playing hide and seek with us. We're supposed to seek, but he is hiding. It's not like it's a miracle. A miracle in Hebrew, nes, means banner. When God says, I'm here, look, hello, hey, you see me? The same word for miracle, nes, is a banner. The same word is also used for a test, nisayon, and to lift up. Because the reality of our world is when we're tested, it is all for the purpose of lifting us up. And when we overcome it, we see that God is beneath the surface. And when there's a miracle, we see how God runs the world. So the core miracle, and we raise our voice when we read this part of the Megillah, we call it Tokvo Shalnes. This is a strong part of the miracle. Why this strong part of the miracle? If you look at the story of Purim, this part is not that important. In other words, here's the story. The story was Esther becomes the queen. Haman makes an evil decree. Esther approaches the queen. Esther approaches the king, has a private audience with him and Haman, convinces the king to save her people, and the king gets rid of Haman, and then gives permission to Esther to defend the Jewish people can defend themselves when the enemies of the Jews insist on attacking the next year on that given day. But there's a subplot that we make into a big deal. Big Son and Seresh, the two guards, after Esther is married to Achashverosh, plot to kill the king for some reason. And Mordechai finds out about it, reports it to the king, and the king finds out that night, the night when Haman is coming to ask permission for Mordechai to be hung on the tree. That night, the king can't sleep, and they read the book of records, and they find out that Mordechai was never rewarded. And then Mordechai is paraded through the street, and it is said, "Thus is done to the person the king wishes to honor." But that's a subtext. That story did not change the outcome of Purim. The outcome of Purim was purely by Esther. So what is this? So the idea is that we begin to see the change happening that night. Everything was going Haman's way, and now everything begins to go against Haman's way. Why? Because there's a miracle happening. What's the miracle? The miracle is happening that in exile, even though we have turned away our face and God has hidden his face, he awakens. He is awake. He's always awake. We just don't always see it. So the point though, God reveals how he's awake, and we see how everything begins to shift against the enemies of the Jews and to save the Jewish people. So that Lailahu, we raised our voice that night, the king could not sleep. And that's the strength, the power of the miracle, is because that is the revelation of God, that he cares and is involved even in exile. And this is where the miracle comes from. And this leads us to Yom Kippur. We learned in the Kabbalistic writing that Yom Kippur is called Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. In other words, the Holy Day of Atonement. The Holy Day of Atonement is compared to Purim. Not just it will be like Purim in the future when the Mashiach comes, like we find when King Solomon dedicated the temple, it says in the prophets, that year the prophet said they should eat on Yom Kippur. You see, they rejoiced. The text doesn't say he commanded it, but you see they rejoiced while the dedication of the temple was taking place, which is over Yom Kippur. So the idea that Yom Kippur will be a day of rejoicing is more than that. We're saying even Yom Kippur today is only comparable to Purim. Purim is somehow related to the essence of the Jew in a way similar to Yom Kippur, but on a deeper level. So we have to understand what Yom Kippur is about. So let's take a look at one of the riddles of the Megillah. We make a big deal about this holiday called Purim. Purim is the name for the poor, the lottery. Why do we make such a big deal about the lottery? That's the method Haman used to try to kill the Jews. It's a bit strange to call your holiday after the enemy's weapon. I don't even want to give, any sort of credence to how enemies have tried to kill us in the past. And if we would try to name a holiday after one of those methods, it'd be horrific. So what is this with Purim lottery? So we found in the Kabbalistic that Yom Kippur also has a lottery. We have two goats. One gets chosen to go to the altar and go up to heaven, and the other is sent into the wilderness where it's consumed. What is the idea of a lottery? What did Haman want, and why do we call this holiday Purim? This is the core of the festival. Why? So here's the issue. On the most basic level, if God chooses the Jews because of a reason, then if the reason is no longer there, so then there's no reason to choose them anymore. In other words, if God chose us solely because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel were Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah were wonderful people, and therefore we're chosen, and so there's a memory of the past. If God expects us to behave in a certain way and we don't, so does that make us unchosen? So we see in the Torah, that's not the case. The choosing, God says, you're my firstborn. God says, you're my child, my beloved. God says, I'll never forsake you. So when all is said and done, the irrational love God has for the Jewish people is one which is beyond reason. So here's the story. If we're sinning and our relationship is based on good behavior, so we spoke about how there can be negative consequences that happen when we sin. But Yom Kippur tells us that is a day of atonement, which means no matter how you have severed your relationship with God, every mitzvah is a rope connecting us to God. Every time I sin, I sever that relationship. So no matter how many times and how many things I have severed, there's still beating within the Jew a spark of the divine that can never be eradicated, never be erased, is always whole and complete. We call it the Pintele Yid, the spark, the Jewish spark within, which is one with the divine and cannot be eradicated, can't be crushed. No matter what sins your soul's cut off, that's the lower levels. That's your nefesh, your life force, your emotional, your intellectual. But the core spark, God can't be destroyed. The Jewish soul can't be destroyed either. This is the mystical, and then the Hasidic approach is that Yom Kippur is a revelation of the infinite love God has for us, not based on our behavior. It was based on our behavior. So where is repentance coming from? Where is forgiveness coming from? It's someplace, there's a relationship with God beyond our behavior. So now, here's Haman's question, so to speak. If God is choosing the Jew because of an irrational, or not only irrational, a super rational approach, in other words, not based on our good deeds, but God says, I'm going to love them no matter what, and will never reject this people. So if God is saying that, so the same way he chose them, maybe he can unchoose them. From Haman's point of view, if it is random or not logical and based on a whim of the divine, maybe God can have another whim, which is why it is symbolized, this approach of how the Haman views the relationship God has with the Jewish people is symbolized by him throwing lottery. What he's doing with making a lottery, he's saying, throwing lots. What he's saying is the Jewish people, maybe the relationship with God is based on happenstance. And maybe there's a place where for God, it doesn't matter what happens to them. And what we showed him, or rather God showed him with the Purim story, is that the relationship of God and the Jewish people are not two separate things, where our souls are intertwined with the divine, one with God. So just like, so to speak, God can't change himself. God always was, always will be. So too, the relationship with the Jewish people is one that is beyond any change. Although there may be ups and downs, and that's part of, for our good, and we call it consequence for our sins, but at the core, it is a relationship above logic, above reason, but innate. Like a parent loves a child, no reason you give is going to be the reason why you love the child. You love the child's an extension of yourself. And this idea that there's an innate love, and even more so with God and the Jewish people. You know, the paradox, of course, is that a child who's very well behaved and very accomplished, of course a parent loves him, but you don't see the uniqueness of the parent's love. Why? Everybody loves him. He's a wonderful person. She's a wonderful girl. She's charming, intelligent, nice. What's not to like? But when you have someone who's a troublemaker and the parents are expressing this complete love, doesn't mean acceptance of their behavior, but complete love, that reveals the innate love, that you see it revealed. This doesn't mean it's more or less, but it's revealed because it's not based on anything external. So this is the idea on one level, that the innate love that God has for the Jewish people is revealed, which is like a gorel. which is like a lottery, because it's above a lottery. When we divide the land of Israel, there are three ways it's divided: by lottery, by logic and reason and numbers, and also by revelation. You find all three. And each one, when they divided the land, each one fell out the exact same way. But the idea of lottery, just like we bring the sheep, the goat, to the on Yom Kippur, is that God is saying, I'm relating to you in a way above logic and above reason. It's innate. It's real. It's not, nothing can push it away. There may be hiatus or concealment in the relationship, but deep inside, it is whole and complete. You know, we find this with the temple as well. There are different biblical verses that talk about how the cherubs are facing each other on the altar. And the sages in the Talmud say, how do they reconcile? And they bore witness to this. They saw this. They said, when the Jewish people behave in a manner that is proper, so the cherubs would be embracing one another. When the Jews behaved in a negative manner, they'd be facing away one from the other. And the Talmud says that when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, they found cherubs intertwined with one another, and they said to the Jews, "This is your what you guys worship behind the scenes," thinking it was some sort of idol worship just like theirs. And but the truth is, it represents the love of God for the Jewish people. So the question is asked: 1 second here, I don't understand. Why is it intertwined here at this moment of destruction? And we find in Psalms a song to Asaph about the destruction of the temple. And they say, why is it called a song to Asaph? It should be a keening to Asaph. So we say, no, the fact that God destroyed the physical temple and kept the Jewish people alive despite their sinning is an expression of the innate love God has for the Jewish people, that the Jewish people will not be destroyed. So this idea that the cherubs are intertwined at the moment of destruction is showing that even in a time when they're not doing God's will, they're still, so to speak, God is still, his love is intertwined with them, although at times it may be concealed. And there's a debate about this in the Talmud, where it says, do we call Jews who are sinning servants or children? Because sometimes we say servants are when you're not behaving so well, children when you're behaving well. But one of the proof texts is, it says, return, wayward children, return. In other words, even when we're wayward, we're still children. So this idea number one, the innate love God has for the Jewish people is one above logic and above reason, as expressed on Yom Kippur with the lottery and with the forgiveness, and expressed on Purim by the fact that this lottery that Haman throws, an attempt to align the stars in his favor and align the divine powers in his favor to wipe out the Jews, was doomed to failure from the beginning, because there is an innate relationship above logic and above reason, where it is immutable. That is theme number one. Theme number two was the idea of nature versus miracle, and the king awakening. That the king awakening was that even in exile, where godliness seems to be more concealed because of suffering. In other words, heaven, God is revealed. On earth, in this world, every world is layers and layers of concealment. That's what a world means. God is more and more concealed. Exile, when there's suffering, God forbid, an exile within an exile, where you're in a place of darkness, God forbid, you're suffering, people around you are suffering. So God is even more concealed. When God wakes up there and shows that God is in this place and I did not know, this is what Jacob says, in the place, I did not realize this, that God was here. We say this about everything in the physical. We're supposed to uncover the divine, even in our suffering, even in the tremendous pain. Here we are, the Jewish people are at the cusp of being slaughtered, and God awakens and they see that God is present throughout, even when it seems like he is distant, which is the point of both nature and suffering. It seems. That's what we feel. We know, of course, God is always here, but we don't feel it. And the trick is to be able to make it part of our life. Purim gives us that power. So let's talk about nature and miracle, and Purim miracle versus Passover miracle. On Passover, God smashes exile. He overpowers the Egyptians. He shows the Egyptians that he controls nature. He takes the pestilence, the water turns into blood, frogs, all nature run amok. God is bigger than nature. God is stronger than nature. God controls nature. In other words, God in nature, we call that the name of Elohim. God's name, Bereshis bara Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim created. Elohim means God using the attribute of justice, of limitation, and concealment. As a matter of fact, the numeric value of God's name, Elohim, the different names of God, Elohim, which represents the godly force in nature, its numeric value is 86, which is the same numeric value as the Hebrew words for the nature, Hateva. In other words, of course, Elohim is God in nature, but there's so many people that walk through life not seeing the divine. A miracle allows even a pharaoh to see the divine, but there are different types of miracles. There's one type of miracle which is overpowering nature. But then there's another type of miracle where God acts within nature. Now you might think that that seems to be a lower level, but in truth, that's the ultimate, and that's what it will be like when the Messiah comes. When Mashiach comes, we are all going to look at nature, and the veil will be removed from our eyes, and the veil will be removed from nature, and we will see the divine light and energy giving life to all of nature. We're going to see it. We're going to see the divine field, the divine presence in the physical world. There were different righteous people that had an insight into this in their lifetime. There's a famous story of the first Chabad Rebbe of Shner Zalman when he was passing away in a little Russian village, Vienna. He'd been running away from Napoleon. And on his deathbed, he asked his grandson, pointing at the ceiling of the room they're in, "What do you see?" Or his son, "What do you see?" He says, "I see," the son says, "wooden beams." "What do you see?" "I see the word of God giving life to those beams." He's already in a place of sensing and seeing the spiritual, the divine in all things. So the ultimate is not just the miracle where you overpower nature. So what's interesting is what's the ultimate? We should see God in nature. Purim is the mix of both of these ideas. It's a miracle, which means above the power of nature, God the way he is above the cycle of natural existence, but he takes control and reveals not just he's stronger than nature, which he does on Pesach, but reveals rather how he is one with nature because he uses the natural cycle of things to do the miracle. This is why we say that the miracle of Purim, the book of Esther, will have special significance when the Messiah comes, because it is really a taste of Mashiach in this world. In this world, we see how the physical, material world is really controlled and run by God. And that even though at times we may feel lost or alone or doubt, Purim tells us God is running the show. Nature is not nature. Nature is God. But it takes work, so to speak, to come to that conclusion. Plus, it takes our experience where we see it and we celebrate to help bring that home for us. So miracle and nature, breaking through the concealment, and Yom Kippur, there's another element as well. On Yom Kippur, we strip away the physical world. Yom Kippur, we don't eat, We don't drink. We don't engage in marital intimacy. We're removed from the physical world. On Purim, we are totally vested in the physical world. What does that mean? It's a holiday which we express by eating and drinking and feasting. And the Hanukkah, in contrast, I'll give another example, the primary way we celebrate is with candles, which is a more spiritual form of celebration, praise and candles. Here we feast and we eat and drink. Why is that the case? On a very simple level, it's because on Hanukkah they wanted to destroy our souls, and on Purim they want to destroy our bodies. So we celebrate each one with the salvation. Purim, the body, and Hanukkah, the soul. But the truth is, even Purim has an element of the soul, because Haman's complaint was, here you have a people that is different and distinct from all the others, and they don't keep the rules of the king. In other words, if they would have kept the laws of the king, if they would convert and change the religion, they would be saved. But not one Jew over that entire year thought of converting out. Not one Jew thought that maybe it'd be better and easier for me if I joined the enemy, the other team, switch my allegiances. They had total and utter dedication. But going back to our earlier theme, the fact that God chose the souls of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people's souls were endowed with the unique power to keep the Torah mitzvahs, that being a Jew is something where God gives us this ability to fulfill his mission on earth, which is to make the world a dwelling place for him. In other words, all of humanity is given a mission. And the mission is make this world fit for humanity to live on. But the Jewish people are given another mission. Make this world fit for God to dwell in. So every little mitzvah is using the material physical world to reveal the divine. Kosher, Shabbos is about bringing God into the physical world. So the fact that a Jew has a soul that's special and distinct is not such a big news. We know this. God gave us a unique mission, therefore he gave us unique powers. But God chooses on Mount Sinai not just the soul of the Jew, but the body of the Jew. The body of the Jew is also holy and part of this mission. And that ultimately, when the Mashiach comes, our bodies will perceive the divine presence. The same way now we get pleasure from the physical world, in the future we'll get pleasure from the spiritual. Our physical senses will be transformed in that way. So, going back to body, soul, another theme which is related to this is the self-sacrifice that the Jewish people had. When God awakens, we do find that there is a catalyst and a cause. The catalyst and cause is by us having a commitment to God, by us being willing to stand up for our faith. That causes, so to speak, the awakening from God himself. Which leads us to the drinking of Purim. So why do we drink on Purim? Now, it's a very strange law. It says you should drink on Purim to the degree that you don't know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed and Mordechai. Now, if you look at the whole Purim story from beginning to end, there are many parties, a lot of drinking. First, Achashverosh starts with a 180-day feast, then a 7-day feast. Then he makes another one when he makes Esther queen. Then there's 2 that Esther makes, 1, 2 for Haman, number 1, and king. And then again, another Mishteh. Mishteh is drinking. The whole thing takes place seemingly when the king is drunk and he's out of it. So on a very simple level, every Jewish holiday, or many of them, take the themes of the persecution or the event and flip it on its head. So for example, the Greeks on Hanukkah were all about beauty, and the menorah is the symbol, and the light is a symbol of beauty in this world. Or Purim, the Achashverosh and Haman, they're drinking when they make the decree against the Jews. So everything is done through the drinking, and now we, so to speak, reverse it. But it's something deeper here. And the deeper idea is that there's a spiritual component here, which doesn't have to be through physically drinking. But we spoke about earlier, that is a level of connection to the divine above logic. We call that the core of our soul, the Pintele Yid, the spark of the divine. It's revealed on Yom Kippur, but it can also be revealed on Purim. And not through rejecting the body, because we just said the body on Purim is the main thing. Haman wants to wipe out the body. God chooses the body of the Jews at Mount Sinai, not just the souls. The souls are part of our mission to serve the divine. We're given unique powers, but our body is chosen. And when Mashiach comes, our physical bodies will be conduits for the divine. So this is why on Purim, we both eat and we drink, but also the idea is to reach a level of awareness that it is wonderful, it is beautiful to be a Jew. My both body and soul should be feeling that transcendent love of the divine. Purim is not about the logic and reasonable relationship with God, that, oh, if you do good, you'll get good. If you do bad, you get bad. That's true, but there's something deeper and beyond and transcendent. At the same time, it permeates every part of Purim, which is that there's a relationship with the Jewish people that is above logic, above reason. And this is the idea of drinking to the degree that you lose your ability to know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai, is that idea that you reach a place where God's love for you is not based on, are you a Mordechai or are you a Haman? No, you're a Jew and God chose you and God loves you and God picked you. And this is what we celebrate on Purim. It is the rejoicing of the essential Jewishness of body and soul. Which leads us to another theme that is important in Hasidic thought from the Talmud, which we had touched on once before. But it says at the end of the Megillah, the Jewish people reaffirmed and reaccepted that which they had received. Kimu v'kiblu. They reaffirmed and they accepted that which they had already received. And the Talmud says they reaffirmed and they accepted what they had once been given at Mount Sinai. They made a rededication to the Torah in exile. Before Ezra's going to, or maybe Ezra did it in the land of Israel, but they make a rededication to keeping the Torah. So Talmud says, why? Why a rededication? Talmud says, if you read the biblical text about the giving of the Torah, it does say the Jewish people said, we will do and we will listen. So there's another verse that I'm going to say seems to be a contradiction. The other verse says, or the Medrash seems to be a contradiction. The other verse says like this, they stood at the bottom of the mountain. So one interpretation in Talmud says, God lifted up the mountain over their head. It doesn't say they stood at the foot of the mountain. Some books will translate it. Literally means under the mountain. They stood under the mountain. Why under? Because God lifted up the mountain and said, accept my Torah or you'll be buried here. That's the Medrash. Accept the Torah or I revert the world to nothingness. You guys are finished. I bury you here. It's all over. Now, this is a problematic story because it contradicts other parts of the Torah too, where the Jewish people willingly accepted the Torah. But let's just accept at face value for a moment this story, this Midrash. A Midrash always has a deeper meaning. So the Midrash says that God lifted up a mountain, held it over the head and said, accept the Torah or I bury you here. So until the Purim story, the Jewish people, the Talmud says, had a great excuse if they sinned. It wasn't our fault. You coerced me. I didn't really want to do it. You held a mountain over my head. This is all from the Talmud. The Medrash is in the Talmud. In other words, on Purim, the Jewish people reaffirm and recommit, and we can no longer say there's a mountain that was held over our heads, and therefore we're fully responsible and committed to the Torah. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is a Hasidic interpretation, and we understand, like we said with Maimonides, that every Medrash that goes against logic or reason or biblical text has to be reconciled. And we assume that since the sages knew the biblical text, they had a point here. So here's a beautiful point. The beautiful point is, if someone takes you out of prison, gives you a job, gives you tremendous wealth, finds you a spouse, sets you up in a new home, and says, I want you to join my company, will you say no? The guy broke into prison, destroyed the prison, took you out, took care of you, and says, will you join my company? Of course. Will you follow the rules? Of course. It's not even a question. But it's possible the reason why you're saying I'm going to do all those things is because you have a sense of reciprocity. You feel a sense of obligation because the person showered you with love. When someone showers you with love, it's very hard to kick them in the face. I know people that manage to do that, but in general, most people, like it says, Kamayim apanim apanim, as water reflects the face, so too does one heart reflect that of his fellow. In other words, if I shower someone with love, they're going to show me love back. When God showered the Jewish people with love by taking them out of Egypt and redeeming them, and then bringing them before Mount Sinai, this idea the mountain was held over their head doesn't mean literally. No, far from it. They accepted it willingly. But it's possible one could say, and they may not have known themselves, am I accepting this because I really want to be in a relationship with God? Do I really want to be in this covenant with God? Or do I feel I owe him big time? You saw what he did over the whole year. He took us out of Egypt. He did miracles and he did the plagues. Chad Gad Yah, Dayenu. Sorry, Dayenu. Look all the things God did for us. How could I not praise him and thank him? I'm on board. But wait, isn't that just the flip side of being punished? If someone punishes me, I'm afraid of you and I follow you, how is that so different if I'm rewarded and given all these blessings? Maybe also it's because of that. We don't know. In other words, could be you have an innate love for God, but because he gave you this incentive, $10 million in cash, unmarked bills, and a briefcase to join his company, how would you say no? So we don't know until along comes the Purim story. The Purim story reveals retroactively what the Jews felt at Sinai. The Purim story when they stood at the cusp of destruction, but no one thought of joining another religion. No one thought of taking the easy way out. No one thought of converting to save their skin. They revealed retroactively that when they stood at Sinai and they received the Torah, they did it wholeheartedly. It was from the core of their soul. The essence of their soul was revealed. Oh yeah, it's true, God did give us candies. God did give us, he gave the plagues and took us out and brought us to the land of Israel. All those things are true. But why did we accept the covenant? Not because of those things. We accepted that because we wanted that relationship with God. How do we know that? Purim proves it, so to speak. The entire Jewish people, once again, everyone, because all the Jews, not one of them converted out of the whole kingdom. All Jews were under the rule of Persia at the time. So what do we see from here? It was a reenactment of the giving of the Torah, but without all the beauty and the gift. They accepted it willingly, even though it was a place where they didn't know what was to come. They did not know that it was going to be good. It was the place of darkness. And still, they persevered and they reaccepted and recommitted. And we say at the giving of the Torah, every Jew is standing at Mount Sinai. Even future generations were there, and everyone accepted the Torah. But here, at the giving of Purim, it's a different type of accepting. It's an accepting that reveals the essence of the soul. Again, it's the same theme going through all these ideas, that there's an essential bond of God and the Jewish people. Whether in exile, God awakens, or the Jew awakens. The Jew awakens. My heart is also awake. How is it awakened? Sometimes it's because of external persecution that we wake up and remember who we truly are. Not because we're trying to avoid the persecution, but it's a jolting wake-up call. So this idea, the innate love of God of Yom Kippur, the innate love of Purim, the choosing of the body, the awakening of God the King, God being present in exile. This is all the Purim story. This is the Purim story from a Hasidic perspective. God within nature, God within each one of us, an irrevocable bond. So these are the major themes. I'm sorry I didn't have text this time. I was running around today, just made it back in time for the Shiva. So I want to open up for questions. Karen points out God brings rain and sunshine, the good and bad alike. That's true, which is why in the physical world, godliness is concealed. In other words, the fact that people who are sinning, who there is already waiting some sort of consequence for them, but we don't always see that in this world. We see the wicked prosper. But we do believe in a God of justice, and there will be an element of justice in the future world, although that's not the end of the story. Very quickly, to put that in perspective, and anyone could ask could verbalize the question, we could view, why do the righteous have reward in heaven and the wicked get punished? Why in this world does it seem like that's not always the case? So one approach is divine justice is important. Therefore, we have heaven and hell. Another approach, which we said here, it's not punishment, it's consequence. When I choke off the divine flow, negative things happen to me. If I steal from you, I get a hole in my pocket. If I don't get that in this world, in the next world, that money's going to burn a hole in my heart. What does that mean? It's going to make me feel really bad. Emotional pain can be worse than physical pain. You could be ashamed in the world to come when you're standing before God, you'll burn up like a fire. It doesn't mean someone's roasting you. You're not being grilled, but rather you're feeling the shame. Or because of inertia, if you did not do a sin, you feel coldness. In other words, it doesn't have to be a physical. It's not. The soul's not physical. It's rather the consequences of what we do to ourselves. But it's a deeper message. The deeper message is no, it's not a punishment. It's not even consequence. It's a product of God's love for us. In order for us, the human being, to be able to appreciate good things, we have to work for them. That's the way God made us. And if I sin, God gave me the power to mess up my soul. Not to destroy it, but to make it desensitized. So any suffering in this world or the next is to purify my soul. If I can get on board with that, so then it's no longer a punishment. It's not even a consequence. It's a gift. This is accepting suffering with love. Now, we don't want that. We want revealed good in this world. We don't want suffering. But if we did suffer, the Jewish approach would be first see it as a punishment, then move up in your spiritual stature and recognize it's a consequence, and then come to the place where you recognize the ultimate love that God has for you, that he's cleansing you. In other words, whatever happens to us at any point in our life is somehow the ultimate good from the ultimate good God for our ultimate good. And again, Purim is the holiday of God within nature being revealed. Not just God in nature. That's why it's a weekday. Purim is not a holiday like Pesach that you can't drive. Purim, you can do work. Because Purim is about this idea that it's about changing the physical, revealing the material world, how God is here and God is present. And we see it even in the happenstance of the government and of the kings and the changing of the guards. All these things, we see God. People get upset about political situations, about health situations, and we should pray for change, and we should act for change, and we should do whatever we can to heal people, make the world a better place. But the message of Purim is there's somebody running the show. Doesn't mean everything should stay the way it is. Everything happened for a reason. But we have to look how we can improve the world while not rejecting that it is God running the show. Yes, Karen.
Thank you. So Purim, if you're able to work during Purim, just curious, how come you can't have an additional Zoom?
I could have a Zoom, but you're not doing the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah. hearing
So
the
wait,
Megillah.
let me just finish. So if you have the Zoom during your service, then people would possibly choose that instead of the in-person?
Exactly.
I see. So I understand.
Right. Otherwise,
Oh, wait,
people.
wait, 1 second. Also, I'm curious, if I'm reading the Megillah at home, if I'm reading it with my eyes to myself or even out loud, then I'm hearing it. Is that correct?
Right, yes, but the mitzvah in the Megillah is to read from a scroll. If you have a scroll written in Hebrew or in English, if it was written properly, translated properly, you could read it from a scroll, but you don't have a scroll, you have a book.
Well, I have the art scroll, but
Right.
I understand. But I understand that that's
The
not
scroll
a
is a parchment. In other words, like the Torah being read, the Jewish people read from the Torah every week on Shabbat, Monday, and Thursday. They don't use a book.
Because when you do your Purims in the past, as I recall, I guess you do both. You read the scroll and then you also have it up on the screen.
Right, so people could follow along while they hear from the scroll. Look, it's never perfect. This year is less perfect than ever.
No, but you're doing a great job, Rabbi, covering all of the above. You're doing exceptional.
There are recordings, Karen, online, and there are other live Zoom ones that people are doing. But I didn't want at all, because if a person is going to read the book at home, that's just as good as me doing Zoom. There's no benefit of me doing Zoom, and I don't want someone to think, and because we're going back to real life in a couple of months or a year with God's help, and I don't want to lower the bar and change that. Really, that's my concern. So now,
Right, I understand, Rabbi. I understand.
if anyone's worried, we have people could drive up as well. You saw the options on the email that you could drive up in your car, and we're going to have someone read. And even if you just want to come by to do the mitzvah of the Purim meal, we have New York Deli. So let us know so I can make sure I have enough for everybody.
Jacqueline is asking, is it supposed to be, it's supposed to be heard in Hebrew? Like
Yes.
Yes, Hebrew.
Although technically, if a scroll was written in any other language, technically it would be kosher. In other words, not the Torah, but the Megillah, just like it was, the Megillah itself could be written in theory in Greek, in English, on a scroll. The reason they don't, and Karen, you could give us the reason, what's the problem with any translation?
A translation is an interpretation.
Right. So the problem is, the challenge they have found throughout the ages is that to try to write the scroll of Esther that has all the multiplicity of meaning, or even what exactly the word is, you make a choice. So they were never very comfortable. But technically, in the original commandment, the way it was understood, technically you could write it on parchment in English, which I think, again, it's expensive. It would cost, $1,000 by the time handwritten scroll, by the time you're done. But, in theory, it would make sense for somebody, to have that better than a book. But again, you have to do the best you can. And each one of us knows what's the best we can. That's the reality. Right. And that's one of the great challenges. Karen, I appreciate all this. Simcha, what is your thought?
I had lots of thoughts while you were speaking. You tied it all up for me at the end. But in passing, you mentioned something. I had a smile because I never knew you were such an environmentalist. It turns out that God is using nature to really flip the story on Haman, using the real world to flip the story on Haman, and that by God, let me see what notes did I write. That God in nature we call Elohim, same numerical number as nature. God acts within nature. God uses nature to do the miracle. God is running the show. Well, that certainly sounds like the environmental situation that we're in right now, with the condition of the earth.
I want you to develop that. I just want to go back for a second. I wanted to differentiate between three types of interaction that God has with the world. One is nature, which everything seems to be happenstance or according to rules of nature. gravity, etc. Then you have miracle where God breaks the rules of nature. And then you have Purim. Purim, God is overpowering the system called nature by making everything work in the favor in a way that we can see. So it's like a third way in between the two, where we see the hand of God is the expression. Of course, God is in nature, God is also there. But here you have the action of the miracle in a way that the nature is not something that's fighting back. In other words, Pharaoh still chases after the Jews after all the miracles. He wasn't changed. He was overpowered. Achashverosh, even though he was a miserable creature, he was not nice to women, he was not nice to his friends, he was a drunk, but he became favorable. He changed his behavior towards the Jewish people. So this is akin, the ultimate transformation of nature. Back to your idea, though, of the fact that we can see damage that we're doing to the physical world, and that God gave us the choice to be able to damage, just like God gave us the choice to damage our own souls. I would just say, despite that, the vision of God can't be overturned, which ultimately is a settled world with humans existing and thriving. That's God's wisdom, God's will that he wants. So even though we can have setbacks and we can cause acid rain or other things, nevertheless, we can also correct and fix. There's a famous song the Breslover Chassidim like to sing that says, if you believe you can mess it up, believe you can fix it. About our own life and about the world. And look,
we've got a lot of fixing to do.
Simcha, but take a look how in 1 year humanity worked together and came up with all sorts of vaccines. I'm not saying this is the end. I'm sure things will improve, but it's incredible what we can do when we work together. And could be this will be an impetus. Again, I'm not justifying any suffering, but I'm saying how do we grow from it? You have to see how this can be used for something good.
I like your optimism. Optimism is good. We need it.
As long as it's not naivete.
Right.
We would not have woken up in the morning the last 5,781 years if we weren't optimistic.
That's right.
Otherwise, everything could go wrong. Think about it. All right, everyone, I wish you a happy lovely Purim.
Thank you. I wish
May
we could
it be
together.
the blessings from God's abundant hand more than Yom Kippur. Yes, Karen.
Rabbi, I know you want to exit. Just a quick question. Can you explain why it has to be on a scroll?
So I would have to look it up, but why does the Torah also have to be written on a scroll? In other words, why is that the commandment that a physical, written in a certain way with certain ink, you know what I mean? Is it all these details?
It keeps it accurate, Karen. Keeps it accurate.
Wait, because Jacqueline was saying, like, for me, to hear it in Hebrew is to not understand what they're saying.
I know. It's a terrible thing. I'm with you.
Well, not terrible, but
it kills me because the beauty of the words, when I understand the Hebrew, I'm thinking, I have to make a slideshow so people are not bored out of their box, but we believe the soul is hearing the Hebrew.
Right, absolutely.
We believe that before you're born, everyone is taught the soul is imprinted with the Torah. It's something that's ours, and that somehow it resonates even when we don't understand. But you're right, especially with the Megillah.
Well, I guess that's a motivation to teach the Hebrew.
From a young age, because again, older, but even still.
No, you'd be surprised though. You can learn a language, you just have to.
Sure.
But of course.
It's easier when you're young. I just mean it's easier when you're young.
Oh yeah, way easier.
Yeah, honestly, if it was up to me, I would make.
Even like I noticed in the art scroll, because I'm reading First